is Elisa Klein. I'm the new director of NERI Press and Training Center. As many of you may know, Joan Tabachnik, the previous director of NERI Press and Training Center, is now pursuing her federal fellowship at the SMART office at the U.S. Department of Justice. I want to welcome you today to today's webinar, Pathways 4th Edition, an introduction to using pathways with adolescents with sexual behavior problems, offered by the author, Tim Kahn, MSW, featuring his NERI Press book of the same name. Before turning this over to Tim, I want to take a moment to tell you about NERI Press. Our mission is to share cutting-edge research and best practices emerging in our field. For many years, we accomplished that mission only through book sales, but as times have changed in the last several years in the publishing and technology worlds, we're continuing our mission by expanding how we disseminate knowledge in new ways. Over the last 5 years, NERI Press has also offered online courses, a free monthly newsletter, in-person trainings, and now, most recently, these webinars, delivered by our internationally recognized authors and other experts in the field. By answering the most pressing questions in the field, meeting your most urgent training needs, and offering a training platform to the presenters that you want to hear from the most, we continue to achieve our goal of bringing cutting-edge information and education to those of you who work with youth and adults who are at risk to perpetrate sexual harm. To that end, we so appreciate your communication with us. We love engaging with you, getting your suggestions, your input, your feedback, whether it's positive or negative. So please do contact us with your questions, any critiques that you have, and any suggestions that you may have. Just out of curiosity, how many people have participated in a NERI Press webinar before? You should see the screen where you can select yes or no. So I see that about, almost exactly half of you have attended before, and half of you have not. Okay, that's good to know. So half of you are veterans, and half of you are new to NERI webinars. Thank you for filling out that poll. I really appreciate it. I will talk about this more at the end, but if you find these webinars helpful, oh, hold on, I'm on the wrong screen, folks. Well, it's coming up. If you find these webinars helpful, we hope you'll consider becoming a sponsor of our series. Not unlike NPR and other public services, it's your donations that help make this free series happen. So I'd like to suggest that you consider becoming a sponsor of this webinar series, which guarantees you a seat for every webinar in the entire series. And as a sponsor, you will not only be registered by us automatically, but 15 staff members from your organization can join you for every webinar. You will also receive a free gift and two of NERI Press's books. And we, just so everybody knows, we do offer free CE credits for all of you who attend the live webinar. And we look forward to your consideration of sponsoring this webinar series. Before we get started with Tim's presentation, there are a few more things I'd like to share. First, as with all workshops, I want to let you know the learning objectives. They're up here on the screen. Participants will understand how to use pathways in their treatment programs, become acquainted with additional exercises and resources that will make pathways more interesting to clients, and increase your comfort level in guiding clients through the Pathways workbook. I also want to let you know that the PowerPoint will be posted on the NERI Press website shortly after the webinar is over, and we'll also be posting a YouTube recording of the webinar next week. Third, when the workshop is over, please be sure to answer the short survey at the end. We really do appreciate your feedback. And lastly, after about a week, we'll send you a follow-up email that has a link to the recordings and links to certificates of attendance, which you can download should you need them. I want to talk briefly about the books that Tim has authored and that he will be discussing during the webinar. Pathways is an accessible, down-to-earth workbook and teaching tool that leads the client toward a new life as a responsible member of his or her own sexual abuse prevention and safety team, and as a person who will not victimize another person. Pathways presents assault cycle and relapse prevention techniques as tools for understanding and prevention. Pathways helps clients look at the maintenance behaviors that keep them cycling through anger, boredom, and other feelings that feed their cycles. Healthy Families is for parents of children undergoing treatment for sexual behavior problems and illegal sexual behavior. Healthy Families supports and informs parents of all children in such treatment, regardless of the workbook they are using. An extended appendix includes information specifically related to adolescents working in the 4th edition of Pathways and for children working in the 2nd edition of Roadmaps to Recovery. However, clinicians who engage parents in the treatment of young clients will find Healthy Families to be a valuable resource independent of the workbook being used. We're really pleased that we're able to offer a special discount on either or both of these books through April 10th. If you use the discount code APRI10 when you check out, you'll get 20% off either or both of Tim's books. I'd like to introduce our speaker, Timothy Kahn. Tim is a nationally recognized clinician and trainer in the field of sexual offender treatment. He has been practicing in correctional, residential, and outpatient programs for 40 years. His well-known books, Pathways, and his newest book for parents, Healthy Families, are serving as models for the juvenile sex offender treatment process in programs across the country and around the world in countries such as Japan. His guided workbook, Roadmaps, also provides a framework for the treatment of young children with sexual behavior problems. Mr. Kahn served as a member and as the chairman of the Washington State Department of Health's Sex Offender Treatment Provider Advisory Committee from 1990 to 1998, which developed evaluation and treatment standards and licensing requirements for sex offender treatment providers in Washington State. He is an ATSA member, and he maintains a private practice in Bellevue, Washington. Thank you, Tim, for being here. This will be a wonderful webinar, and I will now hand the screen over to Tim so that he can do his presentation. Thank you.
That you are now going to be able to see the PowerPoint presentation. Let me just see if we're on track. That all looks good to me. Now, I have not presented in a webinar before, so it's a little bit interesting not to have any audience feedback. The only thing I see outside my window are some squirrels running up and down the tree, but thank goodness I don't have the amount of snow that you folks have on the East Coast. We have light rain today here in Bellevue. So what I want to do is spend this hour sharing with you what I have learned over the last, 30 years since I first wrote the first edition of Pathways, and give you some kind of hands-on tools that would make Pathways more effective in your treatment program. So I will be making reference to some additional resources that will be available on the NERI Press website after the webinar, and I hope to be able to help you become more comfortable using Pathways with clients. So here it is, the 4th edition of Pathways. And I do want to just let you know that a lot of people over the years have asked if they can kind of use Pathways as their treatment model. And what I've always told them is Pathways is a treatment tool. It's not really a treatment model. It is one resource. When I first wrote the first edition, it was the only resource that was available for adolescents. Now there are many resources that you can use with adolescents. But it really isn't a standalone treatment program. What I hope to do with Pathways is help provide a treatment structure for clinicians. And finishing Pathways doesn't really mean that treatment is over, because that's a complicated decision based on the risk assessment of the client and family factors and a lot of things that go beyond just one book. When to use Pathways? I have used it successfully with youth between the ages of 11 and 21. I've used it with adjudicated and unadjudicated youth. I've used it with boys and girls, and I've used it in outpatient and inpatient programs. So I think it can be used successfully in all of those situations. I've really designed it to be used early in the treatment process, sometimes even when the kids are going through the evaluation. So the sooner they can get started, the sooner they can experience some sense of relief, some sense of support. And please let your clients know that you've heard this directly from me, that all of the examples throughout Pathways and in Healthy Families are real examples of real clients. So that, I think, helps bring some realism to the process. When I first wrote Pathways, the chapter structure was given careful consideration, and we had many long-distance phone calls with professionals around the country trying to reach agreement on what was the best way to handle different topic areas. The primary one was that a client's own sexual victimization, if they had that, should be addressed early, should be addressed late. There wasn't any clear consensus on that, so that what we ended up doing was introducing information about the impact of sexual abuse in a relatively early chapter, which is chapter 4, and then spending more time on that subject in chapter 10. But the chapter structure really starts off with low-risk kind of educational exercises to provide a framework of information for clients, and then moves on to more personal and emotional sharing later in the book as clients become more comfortable and develop some treatment skills. Generally, I recommend that you stay with the chapter structure, with the one exception being some highly sexualized kids who are having a hard time containing their sexual acting out. It may be helpful to move ahead and do chapter 8 with them early, which is all about arousal control and teaching some of the key arousal control skills. So chapter 8 can be used early with some success. The other exception is in cases of intrafamilial sexual abuse where the victim therapist really wants the reunification to occur quicker rather than later, then we will go ahead and do the chapter 11 reunification process perhaps earlier than we otherwise would. The idea was in putting the reunification at chapter 11 is it gives kids a chance to really learn some treatment tools before they get put back into a situation living with a victim. But there are cases with low-risk kids, with solid families, where reunification can occur relatively quickly. So in that case, we may skip ahead and do chapter 11 a little bit more rapidly. I've used Pathways successfully with kids who have molested younger children, with kids who have committed more aggressive rapes or assaults on peers or adults, with kids with a paraphilia, such as voyeurism or exhibitionism, and sexual harassment. You can use it with kids in individual therapy, group therapy, or a combination of the two. Most of us who work in this field are using some combination of group and individual therapy. So in my presentation today, I'm going to try to give you some ideas of how you can use Pathways and selected assignments in a group context. Therapists often ask me how long does it take clients to complete Pathways. The soonest, most rapid client was, I think, about 8 months, and he came from a very solid family. And 24 months is pretty much the outside range, and a lot of kids are completing Pathways in 12 to 18 months. This is my other book for younger children, ages 5 to 12, Roadmaps to Recovery. Um, this is designed for therapists to really do with their younger clients. With a lot of my clients, I do the writing in the book, they do the coloring, and it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. And there's a process with that called developing a safety plan, which is a 3-ring notebook where you take all the important things that you're talking about in treatment and you make nice little pretty pages and put it in a 3-ring binder, and that becomes kind of their culminating project, if you will, that describes their treatment process. And there are cases where kids will go from roadmaps and they'll do pathways later. I do have some kids right now at 10 and 11 start with roadmaps, and then they still have work to do, so they end up doing some work in pathways as they get older and their reading ability increases a bit. This is the Footprints workbook that my son Krishan Hansen and I have developed for clients with developmental delays. Again, it's a workbook that relies on the therapist to kind of help guide the process with the adolescents and adults with disabilities. And just to comment on the kids with disabilities, you know, they have sexual drives and feelings just like higher functioning youth, but they have typically impaired social skills, poor judgment, poor impulse control, which complicates and extends supervision and treatment needs. So it can be a slower, more difficult process with those types of clients. This is the book that goes along with Pathways, the Healthy Families book. It's the second attempt I've made to write a book for parents, and I think this one has been relatively well received because it's very positive and upbeat. My earlier book, which was a Pathways Parents Guide, just talked a little bit too much about the negative outcomes, and it really was overwhelming for parents. But parents tell me this is one that really gets them motivated, it gets them feeling good about the process, and it also contains a parental involvement section at the end that I'll talk about in just a little bit. But I would really recommend that if you're using Pathways or roadmaps with clients, that you invest in some Healthy Families books and give one to parents. I give one to parents at the beginning of every evaluation, primarily because of the chapter on the legal system, and it explains SAPO orders, which are the sexual assault protection orders, and just what to expect in the court process, as well as giving an introduction to the evaluation and the treatment process for kids. So I have found it to be very, very helpful, and I think you will also. As I said, give the book to families early in the treatment or evaluation process. It gives them support and guidance. It has a lot of good information about the treatment process, the reunification process, the need for supervision, as well as the legal process. We also use a parent support education group. Now, I've done a lot of training around the country, and I know parent groups are hard to get going. When I worked in the institution system, we could never really keep one operating because it was so difficult to get parents to attend. I do have a few strategies that I've evolved over the years. One is I run a parents group at the same time that I run an adolescent group. So the parents are bringing the kids anyway, so they're going to be there. And I don't charge for it. I simply pay for it out of my overhead because parents don't want to spend extra money on things that they don't deem to be absolutely essential. I encourage you to reach out to parents, get them involved in the process, and then teach them to ask the questions in the back of the Healthy Families book. And I actually have the parents come in and I show them how to do it for the first couple of chapters. I don't just tell them to go ask the questions. I actually teach them how to do it. And that gives the client a chance to share what they've been doing in the workbook. And it also helps the parents not peek and look at what the kids are writing. I try to tell parents to keep the Pathways book private while the kids are working in it, and then the kids will share things as they get to that point. We also have all of our kids who graduate from treatment do presentations to the parent support education group. So they take their Healthy Life project in, they go through it with the parents get to ask questions, then we buy a cake for them and we have a big celebration. So there's kind of an end process that makes everybody feel good and feel like they've really accomplished something. We don't call it a parent therapy group. We do it as an educational support group. We give parents a chance to check in and share about their situation. And then we also do educational modules to teach parents about the treatment and supervision process. All right, let's start and talk about how to actually use pathways with clients. So when you get the book, one of the things that we do, this is kind of a little bit off track, I actually have the kids pay for their own books since I actually have to purchase them myself. And I tell the kids, you know, I take payments as low as $1 and you can take up to a year or two to pay it off. And I try to encourage the parents to have the kids actually pay for it out of their work and allowance and whatnot because they take better care of it when they do that. The book is theirs to keep. Most kids take the book home. Occasionally you have trouble getting the books back to the next session. And then you have to work with the parents to try to figure out a plan to make that work. So when we start with pathways, I have them read the introduction, and I always have them read the first paragraph out loud to make sure that their reading level is sufficiently high. There are kids who just have a really hard time reading, and I kind of want to know that at the beginning of the process because I'm going to need to help them. We're going to need to go a lot slower. I'm going to have to review things with them and kind of walk them through the process. You don't want to give pathways to a client who doesn't have the reading ability to complete it. So then I have them, the first week's assignment, almost without exception, is for them to read the introduction and pathways and do what it tells them to do. Now the introduction is about, 4 to 6 pages long, something like that. And it teaches them to sign each page. And that's very important because probably 30% of all clients come back the next week and they haven't signed the pages because they really haven't read the book closely. And that's just something that tells me that they're really not careful readers. They're really not attending to that. And so I have to deal with that with them. I always give out written assignment sheets, and I think I have one here for you. Yeah, this is a sample sheet that I print out, and it has the date and time of their next appointment, and then I have a checklist of the things I want them to do. So my first assignment checklist for a client is going to be bring the folder back because that has your journals in it and it has your assignment sheet in it. I also use that folder to put the list of laws and things like that I'll be talking about in a few minutes. I have the actual pathways assignment, which is read the introduction and pathways and do what it tells you to do, and do a daily journal every day. Now, I really encourage you to not say things like work in pathways. Give them page numbers to do, and then ask them not to go beyond a certain page or a certain chapter, because I've seen way too many kids just do speed reading and saying I'm done, and then they don't really attend to putting any effort into the assignments. So I want to give them a specific number of pages to do. I want them to read it. I want them to sign each page indicating that they read it and then come back and discuss it with me. The introduction in Pathways helps clients believe and understand that they're not alone. It introduces the 4 primary treatment goals, which are honesty, responsibility, sensitivity, and integrity. Those are things that we're constantly working on with all of the clients. Saying if you can achieve all of those goals, then it's going to be really difficult to act out sexually again, because you just cannot do that if you were demonstrating those 4 qualities. It also instructs the clients to sign each page. Now, in the introduction, they're simply signing one of the check boxes at the top of the page, and I should have put an example of that in the PowerPoint. But there's 2 check boxes on each page. One is for the client, one is for the therapist. So when I've reviewed that page with the client, I check it off so we always know where we are. Now the tricky part is in later chapters, the instructions in the book tells them to sign the checkbox with different symbols. And many kids just don't read carefully enough to catch that. So you'll learn pretty quickly when you get to that section whether or not they've actually read it sufficiently well enough to change the way they're signing it. In Chapter 1, we're introducing clients to the evaluation and treatment process, including the court process. We're explaining the role of prosecutors and defense attorneys, that kind of thing. There is a list of generic sexual assault laws, but understand these are not sexual assault laws that probably apply in your state or province. Now, Canada has provincial sexual assault laws that apply across the country. But in the United States, we have, every state with different sexual assault laws. So what I recommend you do in your specific state is compile your own handout of what the laws are and an explanation of them, and give that to your clients as a supplement to Chapter 1. Rather than having them go through the generic list of laws, actually use the specific laws in your state or province. I think that makes it more real for the kids, and it just makes more sense to me. There are some beginning kind of consent education sections in Chapter 1 that introduces the concept of consent and informed consent. And then it provides some scenarios about legal and illegal behavior. There's some that ask them to say whether it was consensual or non-consensual. And then there are, I think, 10 or 12 situations that ask them to identify the specific law. And that's where I want you to use the specific laws handout for your state or province. It also, in Chapter 1, assesses their pornography experiences, and if you're experienced in working with these clients, you'll know that almost every adolescent is going to struggle with pornography because so much of it is easily accessible. So it is something that I suggest you talk a lot with your kids about, and get them to be able to share with you what they're actually seeing and experiencing. Let's see. So this is about the additional laws assignments. I did put one up that's going to be on the website after the webinar. It's a Pathways Sexual Situations Questionnaire. It has about 20 or 25 additional sexual situations that you can give to your clients and have them identify the specific laws for those scenarios. Now, I have come to do something even more. I actually give kids weekly additional scenarios. I'm up to, I think I have 35 additional scenario sheets that I give them. And so for week after week, I just add that to their assignment sheet, because it takes kids a really long time to learn how to think about sexual situations and to decide, is this really legal or is this illegal? So I found that just going through Chapter 1 and teaching it isn't really sufficient, but the learning seems to hold better if you can continue to give additional assignments every week. And it's kind of a challenge for the kids. I do it oftentimes with the kids and the parents, because the parents typically don't know what the sexual offense laws are. It's actually one of the more helpful and educational experiences that I do with kids, and all the kids and parents really appreciate that. So I think you will find that to be a helpful addition to Pathways. I'm going to talk, if I have time, a little bit about group therapy, and this is the chart that we use to track kids' progress in Pathways. So we have this chart up in our group room, and kids get to check off the chapter and the specific assignments as they go through it. And then the list at the bottom of the chart is their status in group. And there's a 4-status program which starts at entry status, goes to voting status, then advanced status, and then graduate status, which is when they've completed everything and they're getting ready to do their presentation to the parent support education group. And I will have posted the group therapy advancement requirements on the website, so you can kind of see what I've listed as all of our internal program requirements for going from one level to another. So that'll be available for you. Now, what I'm going to talk about is there's a lot of assignments in Pathways that can be shared with the group, and there's some that are just kind of boring and will just bore your group. So I'm trying to, give you an idea of which assignments would be helpful to share in a treatment group. Assignment 1C and 1D are the healthy and unhealthy parts of their lives. It just helps them share with the other kids a little bit about what their life is like outside of treatment. And then sometimes we'll do the laws scenario quizzes as kind of a competition, and that's always a little bit of fun to do that. Now, going on to Chapter 2, which is about the group therapy process and identifying their problems and goals, the first cue to change how they sign each page is on page 35. So this will actually tell you if the client is actually reading the book. And so take a look at that page when you get there, after you've assigned them Chapter 2, and make sure they're actually reading each page carefully. In Chapter 2, we introduce group behavior guidelines. We have them develop a problem and goal list, which then will get shared with the group. It does a little assessment of their drug and alcohol experiences. It introduces the daily diary. One other thing that we do in our program is we require kids to do a daily diary or a daily journal, but only up until they get to advanced status in the program, which is really up through Chapter 11 in Pathways. Once they get to advanced status, they don't have to do the diary anymore, and what I tell them is that at that point, they're comfortable sharing, and they know that they bring up their own issues on a regular basis, so the need for a journal or a diary really isn't there. But that's a huge reward for the kids to not have to do the daily diary, so that's an important thing to keep in mind. Chapter 2 also talks about anger, and anger being kind of a cover for other emotions, and it teaches feeling expression skills. So the problem and goals list on pages 39 and 40 can be shared with the group. And the problem barrels assignment, which is a way for them to visually draw kind of a list of their problems, is also kind of a fun thing to share. So I would include that as a group sharing assignment. Chapter 3 asks clients to disclose their sexual history, and it teaches them about thinking errors. And this is a picture that a kid did for me last week in Pathways, and I thought it was pretty cute. Everything's going to be just fine, which is magical or wishful thinking. It's not going to be just fine. There's somebody with a big knife in front of them. So anyway, kids have a lot of fun with this, and we have a big notebook of drawings that kids have done depicting thinking errors. So as your program evolves, it's kind of fun to develop those kinds of resources for them. We also have kids share their sexual history outline with their therapist and their treatment group. The idea is to provide a summary of their sexual experience without too much arousing detail. So as Alyssa mentioned, I've done this for many, many years now, and we have gone way beyond these detailed layouts or disclosures that we used to do, where an offender or a kid would describe every single element of every sexual experience. Well, not only is that very boring for other kids, but it also can be arousing in a somewhat deviant way. So what we have come to do is have kids complete this sexual history outline, usually with the therapist helping, and it includes their age, the partner's age, the name, what kind of behavior they engaged in, how they got the other person to do it, where it happened, how he felt about it or she felt about it, and what are the life events. So I've also posted a copy of that on the website. And so typically with a naive young client, it's going to be a one-page sexual history outline, and it's chronological order. So we start with the earliest experiences first, and then work as they get older down the page and onto the second and third pages. And that takes about 10 or 15 minutes to share with group. It's not very arousing. It's not, horribly embarrassing. It doesn't talk about every single element of everything that they've done. It just kind of gives the scope of what kind of sexual experiences they've had. Here's the 4-level system that I've already mentioned. Voting status, entry status, voting status, advanced, and graduate. 3 months on each voting status and advanced status before they qualify for graduate status, which means it's hard to get through the program in less than 7 or 8 months. But that's, in my experience, about right. And again, that's been posted on the website. Chapter 4 talks about direct and indirect victims, myths and truths about sexual abuse. There's an empathy building exercise, and the key assignment you want to give here are 2 weeks of the daily boundary forms, and that's on page 102. So you just photocopy that page, you give them 14 copies of it, and then ask them to do one a day for 2 weeks. And then you have them share a few of those in group just to be interesting and share some of the ones that are good. Kids sometimes have a hard time kind of understanding that, but as you go through it, you want them to just identify when they have respected a boundary, when they could have respected a boundary better, or when they observed somebody else doing something that was either respectful or not respectful, about emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, or even social boundaries, which are your manners and customs. So we want to do that in Chapter 4. Chapter 5 is the preconditions for sexual abuse that we took from David Finkelhor many, many years ago with his permission. And that's kind of a framework for the evaluation and the framework for the treatment process. And we have kids share how they got over those 4 walls. And that's assignment 5A, 5B, 5C, and 5D, where they share that in their group. Chapter 6 teaches about grooming and maintenance behaviors. There's a group sharing assignment, 6B, 6D, and 6F, where they share their grooming behaviors and they share their maintenance behaviors. And then the barriers chart on page 133 we often do in group just because kids have a hard time with it, and we want them to brainstorm and come up with interesting ideas about how they can practice positive behaviors that will keep them living a healthy life and prevent them from falling into any kind of a reoffense situation. The Thinking Error Hall of Fame. I'm not going to molest my brother again for a long time until I'm gone. I had a different prostituter at my sentencing in court yesterday, and I made a fantasy of me and my stepsister having sex, and yes, there was rape in there too. We now have over 100 of these on a clipboard in the group room, and these are real things that kids have said in the treatment process, and some of them are listed in Pathways, and kids, when they read that, generally chuckle, and there's some pretty funny things that kids have said. So again, it's a way to make treatment kind of fun. And kids come into this process feeling ashamed and afraid and just feeling really, really low, and finding ways to help support them and encourage them and help them feel like they're making progress is really, I think, the challenge that we have as therapists. Chapter 7 teaches about events and experiences that contributed to their choice to act out sexually. Offense cycles are kind of out. That's kind of an adult concept that, as research has shed more light on this, many kids don't have offense cycles. They offend, but it's really not a cycle. They're too young and immature and naive to really have developed a full-blown cycle. So we talk about the offense behavior chain. What are the thoughts and the events that have contributed to the choice to offend? That's a little more palatable. Not to say that all kids don't have cycles, because actually some do, but a lot of them don't. So this is a way to recognize that. And the group sharing assignment is 7A, 7B, 7C, and 7J. So we share kind of the factors that contributed, and then we have them share their offense behavior chain, and sometimes even draw that up on the whiteboard in the group room. Chapter 8, as I mentioned earlier, is all about arousal control, positive sexuality, masturbation and healthy sexual fantasies, and coping with inappropriate sexual fantasies. The group sharing assignments are 8A and 8B. Also in Chapter 8, I require one CS form, one covert sensitization form each day for 2 weeks as a general guideline. Kids with a very deviant arousal pattern may need to do more, and sometimes even use the voice recording rather than just the written version. Chapter 9 teaches about lapses and relapses, introduces the idea of a seemingly unimportant decision in a high-risk situation, and we have them share their relapse prevention plan. We don't take a lot of time on that in group because they can be kind of boring, but we do want to share some of the key elements of what they think they're going to do to help prevent putting themselves in those situations again. In Chapter 10, we teach about trauma and encourage learning about the impacts of sexual abuse. And in this chapter, we pull in lots of other resources to help teach kids about the impacts of sexual abuse. We also start work on their Healthy Life project. We try to put in there 10 pages related to victim impacts. And the group sharing assignment is 1 page about the victim impacts. Chapter 11 helps prepare clients for the clarification or reunification process, and I mentioned earlier that clients can work on this earlier if the victim and the victim's therapist and parents want earlier contact. And we always share the clarification letters and the parent clarification letters with the group before they're sent, because that's important that they get feedback from objective listeners who can actually help them make sure that they're not saying anything that's going to be taken inappropriately. And then after they're done with Chapter 11, they can qualify for advanced status. But note that advanced status doesn't include, it also includes things outside of the treatment arena. It includes parent feedback, responsible and honest behavior, and evidence of delaying gratification. So doing the work doesn't get them to advanced status. It's doing the work, using the skills, and demonstrating those skills outside of the treatment arena. And that's really important, that they generalize what they've been learning, and that you get feedback from others before they get to advanced status. Chapter 12 consists of 12 distinct steps. Usually 1 step per week is assigned. There are many parent feedback assignments, and some clients need help from their therapist in getting the parent feedback. And some of those are a little bit redundant. So I will often let kids combine the parent feedback and let them sit down with their parent once or twice during Chapter 12 and do a couple of the step feedback assignments at a time. That kind of minimizes the parent's time. It also helps them get accurate feedback. There's an assignment in step 7, which is they have to do something caring and sensitive for another person every day for 2 weeks. Now, we could really have every kid do that every day for the entire treatment process, and there's value in that. But a minimum of 2 weeks, I want them to actually write down what they're doing in their daily life that is caring and sensitive, and they have to do that on a daily basis. So that's a hard assignment. I try to warn them ahead of time. You're going to have to keep track of this. You're going to have to do something nice and caring. But once you've done that, it's a really pretty helpful tool. In Chapter 12, the group sharing assignments are the victim perspective in Step 8. That's probably the most difficult assignment in the book because they have to put themselves in the position of the victim and describe what happened to the victim from the victim's perspective. And when you get to this assignment and you start working with it, you'll find that you'll learn additional details about what the offender actually did that you've never heard before. Because the offender is actually telling the story, and he knows or she knows what actually happened. And if they've done it well, it's a very impactful assignment to do. It can be very emotional, it can be very difficult to do, and it can be very difficult to listen to. So be prepared for that. It's I think, the most difficult thing for clients to do. Step 12 is a true story. They generally share that with group. And that's about how they dealt with telling the truth after their sexual behavior was discovered. Chapter 13 is helping them live a responsible and healthy lifestyle. The group sharing assignments in Chapter 13 are a very difficult barriers chart on pages 329 and 330. That actually goes into their Healthy Life project when it's done. The self-letter on pages 331 to 334 is a very I think, important assignment where they're actually talking to themselves. So they're writing a letter to themselves, talking about how they feel about what they've done, where they've come, where they're going. When it's done well, it's really an interesting assignment to review and to listen to. If it's done superficially, then it's just that, it's superficial. But some kids really put effort into it, and you gain insight into kind of how they view the world and how they view themselves. And that also would go into the Healthy Life project. The Are You Ready for Sex test on pages 335 and 342 can be completed anytime a client wants to be sexually active with a partner. For younger clients, we're probably not going to encourage them to be sexually active. They complete everything except the partner questions. We still want to teach them about sexually transmitted diseases and contraception. And we use a variety of online resources and handouts to teach them that material. And then if they're not wanting to be sexually active, that's just fine, but they've completed that requirement. On chapters 13 and 14, the final exam and the stop plan both go into the Healthy Life project. And just, I think in this edition of Pathways, it says that the Healthy Life project should be at least 30 or 40 pages, but that's really not long enough. So I have upped that to at least 60 pages, which I think is about right. And we also have an explanation page in the Healthy Life project that kind of tells what the assignment is. And so here's an example of the PIG. The assignments has me show a healthy and unhealthy example related to delaying gratification. PIG refers to a problem with immediate gratification. In treatment, I've been encouraged to delay gratification as much as possible. So that's the intro page to the actual drawing of the PIG that would then go into the Healthy Life project. Weekly treatment strategies. Now I'm going to try to end up here in another couple of minutes and give you folks time to ask me questions. So I'm going to try to get through this. In terms of what you do in counseling with kids, I always try to meet with parents or get feedback from parents for the first few minutes of a session. I review their diaries, kind of see what their lifestyle has been like that week. I talk about what they're doing with friends, talk about what movies they've seen, what TV shows they've watched, what video games they've been playing. I want to see what they're putting into their brain. I always talk about sexual feelings and masturbation on a weekly basis. Also learn about their relationship, who are they dating or wanting to go out with or thinking about asking out. And then we do something in Pathways or whatever workbook we're working in. I'm always teaching feeling expression and trying to support that with clients. I'm always challenging distorted thinking and their irresponsible behavior. I always support delaying of gratification. That's one of the most important treatment skills. I always ask about pornography involvement and urges, because usually there is some. And then I'm talking about healthy sexuality and relationship skills. I'm always supporting physical activity and physical health. I'm monitoring their school performance. I always give written checklist assignments for the next session with their appointment time. I give copies to parents because younger kids will lose their copies. And then I prepare the client for their treatment group if they are in one. A little bit about group therapy before I wrap up. Most groups for juvenile abusers are open-ended. I much prefer an open-ended group versus closed-ended. That means these groups never stop. I have 4 groups right now in my program for adolescents. One of them has been going for 40 years. Every Friday night from 5 to 6:30, that group has existed. Now, the composition of the group has changed. Kids come in and they graduate. But it makes it much easier for me as a therapist when the group is established, the norms are established, the rules are established. A new client comes in, it's very easy for them to pick up on that. I don't have to start a group from scratch and teach all of those skills. The kids don't have to wait to get into a group. They can start one immediately. And let's see, our group size runs 3 to 12. 8 to 10 is my experience as being ideal. We always have 2 or 3 therapists. And on an inpatient program, like a correctional or residential program, you want to have 3 because there's always going to be one out for training or sick or on vacation, so that gives you the 2 that you need. To be a private group room, we do 1.5-hour groups. I think that's pretty common and seems to work best for us. Our adult groups are 2 hours, but the adolescent groups, 1.5 hours are just fine. I've already told you about the group progress chart that we use and about the level system. I've already told you that diaries are only required until advanced status, which is a huge motivator, and that we run one of the parents group at the time we do the adolescent group. One more comment before I open it up for questions, and that is that in my experience, rebuilding an adolescent sexual offender's self-esteem is one of the most important treatment challenges. This particular girl came in and started treatment. She was charged with molesting 2 girls she was babysitting, and she was running for student body president at her high school. And my first meeting with her, I had to politely and sympathetically tell her that she had to withdraw because she couldn't win. If she did win, she'd be on the front page of every newspaper in America. So she had to withdraw from running for office. She later did graduate treatment. She went on to the University of Washington and eventually did a newspaper article that described her experience. But helping her believe in herself again was probably the most difficult thing in working with her, and also the most, I think, impactful thing. Because to this day, she'll call me and talk about her experience, and that is something that's very helpful. As you know, as a therapist, you don't often get that kind of feedback, but this is an example of how that did happen. All right, so thank you for listening. We've gone through the time that I've allotted, and I think you can go ahead and ask any questions that you'd like that would be relevant to you, and I'll do my best to answer them in the remaining 10 minutes.
Tim, thank you so much. This is Elisa again, and I have some questions. We have quite a few questions. That was a great presentation, incredibly useful, I think, for clinicians and others, so thank you so much. Let's get right to the questions because there were so many. The first one is, how do you address situations in which you do not know how, in which youth do not know how to express their emotions or have a limited range of emotional expression?
Well, in the daily journals, we teach them to put feeling words in there. So we would use feeling word lists. So we have, lists of different feeling words. We go through and describe those words to clients and teach them how to talk about their feelings. So the first thing we have to do is teach them what a feeling is. We know when we're hungry, right? We know when we're cold. We know when we're hot. We know when we're sexually aroused. And so we start with those easy feelings, and then we teach them through the therapy process to understand other feelings, disappointed and frustrated and jealous and scared and anxious. So it's not a difficult thing to do. It just takes a lot of time and a lot of effort on the therapist's part to do that kind of teaching.
The next question is, what is the reading level of Pathways?
Well, the reading level is probably, sixth or seventh grade. It's probably a little bit higher than we would like it to be. So, kids with a low reading level, you just have to slow down. You have to work with them and don't give them too much. You might only give them 1 or 2 pages a week so they don't get frustrated. And I do a lot of reading with kids just to help them feel comfortable. And sometimes we'll share it. They'll do one paragraph and then I'll do the next paragraph. Then it's a collaborative effort between the two of us, and they're not getting put down, they're not getting criticized for not being able to read properly.
So that's probably a good segue into the next question. Can parents help their children with their Pathways work?
Well, parents can help their children by getting them to their appointments and participating in the meetings where we have them ask questions from the Healthy Families book. They also can participate in the first part of every therapy session, and so we talk about how things are going at home. Sometimes they can help their kid do the daily journal requirement. Some kids are able to do that on their own. Many cannot. Many need parental help. Occasionally, I have had parents actually sit down with their kids and read and do Pathways with them. But as a general rule, I don't recommend that because there's so many privacy concerns. That has happened and it has worked a few times, but I generally think that's probably not the best way to do it.
Here's a question. Can we make copies of Pathways for use in our program?
Well, you can. Should you is another question. The book is being published by Safer Society Press, which is a nonprofit organization. Every time a copy is made, you're taking money away from an organization that is out there to support us in our field. So I would recommend that you not make Pathways, you make the investment, and you support the organizations that are trying to do this work.
Thanks, Tim. That's an important plug. Another question. Do you find framing the issue as criminal versus non-criminal, as opposed to in moral terms, helpful? The person writes, I could see it as setting up the child as a criminal instead of focusing on the behavior and framing sexual assault as only wrong because it's illegal, not because it hurts others. I'm not sure I read that correctly. Does that make sense to you?
Well, yeah, I think you want to frame it both ways. Morality is something that I generally don't do with, talk about much with clients because that's what a parent's job is to instill that sense of morals. But the society is going to instill this sense of what's legal and what's not legal. So you're on pretty safe ground to cover that. And in terms of victim impact, obviously we want to spend a lot of time helping clients become more sensitive to the impact of sexual abuse. And I tell all of my clients, you can never predict how a victim is going to react to an act of sexual abuse. Some victims seem to recover with very little trauma. Other victims who have experienced fairly minimal sexual abuse experience significant trauma. So I want clients to be sensitive to the issue of trauma and to understand the potential impacts of sexual abuse, as well as explore their own morality and their own sense of right and wrong, which is something they're going to have to develop for themselves as they get older. Framing it in terms of what's legal and illegal is relatively safe because it's something they all have to deal with if they want to not live in a jail.
Tim, we only have about 2 more minutes for questions, which is unfortunate because many more have come in. So we'll just do the best we can with the next 2 minutes. Somebody asks, do children usually easily disclose their own sexual victimization in the chart that you showed? If not, how do you make them comfortable enough to disclose?
They don't do it in the chart. They'll do it in group therapy as they hear other kids talk about their sexual abuse. The same thing, sexual abuse with additional victims, sexual abuse of animals, all of that gets disclosed when they get comfortable doing that. So I would just recommend that it's something we should all be alert to, the possibility that they've been abused. We want to ask questions that make it okay for them to answer those. And I've taught many counselors how to do this work. So I encourage you not to ask yes or no questions. have you ever been sexually abused? Just ask questions that gives them an opportunity to share if they have been sexually abused. But some kids just aren't going to share. I had a teenager come in here about a month ago who had been sexually abused for 10 years, even during the 2 years he was in treatment, and he didn't disclose until 3 or 4 years after completing treatment. So, generally kids do disclose, but the rate or the pace at which they disclose is highly variable. So provide them with opportunities and give them support, and hopefully they will do that.
Here's a super quick question. I think in Chapter 9, what does HRS stand for?
High-risk situation. And the SUD is seemingly unimportant decision. HRS is a high-risk situation.
Okay.
It's also called a danger zone in the roadmaps workbook. Same concept.
So I'm afraid we can only take the time to answer one more question so that we can get everybody out on time. But if people have questions, Tim, would you feel comfortable with them emailing you directly?
Yeah, I'm perfectly okay with that. My email is here somewhere, I think right there, timothycon@cs.com. Just be patient. It may take me a little while to get to it, but I'm happy to answer any questions from anybody in the field.
Great. So the last question that we have time for, although there are several more, within the sexual behavior chain, what if the youth struggles with or is unable to identify the thoughts or antecedents that led to the sexually acting out or sexually reactive behavior?
Well, that's very common. We try to help them identify the key factors. In some cases, it's looking at pornography, got interested, molested sister. There may be more to it than that, but if kids aren't at the point where they can identify anything else, let's just keep it to the basics. But that's not uncommon.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm going to take a few minutes to just close out the webinar, but we're just incredibly grateful that you took the time to do this. It was just such useful information. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
So there are just a few last things that we like to go over at the end of our webinars. And if you just bear with me, I just want to remind everybody that we are offering free CEs for this webinar. NERI Press has partnered with the Global Institute for Forensic Research to provide free CE credits for this March webinar, and you should have been given a chance to sign up for them when you registered. If for some reason you did not see that option on our registration form or have since decided you no longer want CE credits, please email Kristen Lobish at klobish@neri.com. That's KLOBISCH@neri.com. If you attended this webinar by participating as part of a group, signing on from one single computer, or if you attended by phone, please email Kristen so that she can assure that the system marks you as an attendee. Trying to move my screen forward here. I also want to just let everybody know that we also have a free monthly newsletter that we publish at NERI Press and Training Center. We use it to identify a cutting edge or controversial research paper and talk about the findings and implications that it might have for clinicians and our field. You're automatically signed up for this resource, and we hope you find it useful. It does spark a lot of interesting conversation as we're working on it, so hopefully it will do the same for you and your staff. If you like this webinar, you can see previous webinars on our website at neripress.org, and it's also possible to pay for CE credits for all past recorded webinars. We'd like to ask that you consider becoming a sponsor for this year's webinar series or for our next year's series, which will begin September 2017 into 2018. As a sponsor, we send you 2 of NERI Press's popular titles, Current Applications and Current Perspectives, or 2 other books if you've already received these. And you're guaranteed a seat at all of our remaining webinars in this year's series or in next year's series. And organizations are guaranteed 15 seats if you sponsor. We will also do your monthly registration for you. Sponsorship is $98 for individuals and $250 for organizations. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please contact us at info@nearypress.org. You can find our contact information on the nearypress.org website. And let's see, a few quick reminders. The PowerPoint slides and a recording will be posted on the website within a week. Free CE credits, as I said, are available for this webinar. Please watch for an email to be sent within 24 hours of the completion of the webinar if you've signed up for the CE credits. This email will also contain instructions about obtaining your CE credits. You must submit the survey within 1 week of the webinar's completion. If you don't receive an email in 24 hours, please email Kristen at klobish@neary.com, and please complete the evaluation. A link will be sent to you when you sign off. These are our wonderful sponsors. Thank you to all of them for sponsoring our 2016-17 webinar series. We're very grateful. And I'll just end by saying thank you to all of you for attending. And most importantly, thank you so much again, Tim, for such a great webinar. And to all of you on the webinar, we really do welcome your feedback. So please be sure to complete your evaluation form when you close out the webinar. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Bye-bye.